This show is sponsored by Sevi, answering all your commercial real estate needs. Sevi is the first commercial real estate company committed to the 4 C's: commercial real estate, community, content, and culture. Go visit Sevi at Sevi, SEVI, properties.com. Again, SeviProperties.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today I have a very special guest for you. We have Tom Marotta. Tom is the CEO and founder of the Spaceport Company. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks, Otto. Great to be here.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you. You have such a cool name. So in case the audience is like, Spaceport, can you please share a little bit of what you folks do at the Spaceport Company?
Yeah, so thanks, Otto. It's a little unusual. I'll agree. A spaceport kind of sounds like an airport or a seaport, but we focus on rockets, on launch vehicles, and what we do is we build launch pads, and we do it in a kind of an unusual way. We actually build launch pads on ships, and we could get into why that is later on, but the fancy way of saying what we do is we build unique infrastructure solutions for the aerospace industry.
Oh, beautiful. And I can't wait to even go into how that all came about, why you decided to do this. But or before that, I like the audience to get to know you on a personal level. Are you originally here from the DC, Maryland, or Northern Virginia area?
No, I grew up in New York City. So I was born and raised in New York City. Spent my whole childhood there. Went to college out in the Midwest, and then my first job out of college was with an aerospace company. It was with a startup that was based out in Seattle, and they were doing some pretty unusual stuff with nanotechnology and robotics, and it was a little bit ahead of its time. And the company ultimately, it didn't work out for me. So then I went back home to New York, and I got into the real estate business, just like you. I was a commercial real estate agent in New York City.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for about 2 years, and doing mostly multifamily homes in the outer boroughs. And so really kind of honed my sales skills there. And I started asking all sorts of the wrong questions. Well, guys, have you thought about the traffic? And what about your drainage? And my broker said, listen, man, you're in the wrong business. He said, you need to go back to school. So I went back to school and I got my master's degree in urban planning. I became a city planner. And so for then another 2 years after school, I was a city planner in Peekskill, New York, which is in the Hudson Valley. And it's this very old city that's being sort of revitalized. It's a small city, a large town, small city, and it's right there on the Hudson, very picturesque. There's a rail line that goes through. It's very similar to a lot of our communities in the DMV. It has rail access on a river, kind of an older community, and learned a lot there. But at the time, the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict was raging, and at the time, the State Department was hiring city planners to do reconstruction work over in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I took the Foreign Service exam. I joined the Foreign Service, which is part of the State Department, and served our country overseas for 6 years, not in the military, but with the State Department. So I worked in Europe, in Africa, and Iraq. Did make it to Iraq, and so that was a great job. But I was getting further and further away from my passion of aerospace, and so after 6 years of working for the State Department, and that's what brought me to Virginia, by the way, was to work with the State Department. That's a long way of answering your question and saying it was the State Department that finally brought me to Northern Virginia. And so after 6 years with the State Department, I transitioned my federal service from the State Department over to the FAA. The Federal Aviation Administration has a small office dedicated to regulating the public safety around non-governmental rocket launches. So it's like the rocket office in the airplane regulator. The rockets pass through the airspace, and the FAA controls the airspace, so they make sure everything is deconflicted and all that is operating safely. So for 5 years, I worked at the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. Commercial space, like rockets, planets, not warehouses and strip malls, like different commercial space. And yeah, I got to see the industry grow. I mean, at that time, it was about 2016 to 2021, the industry was booming, and it still continues to boom, the commercial space industry. A lot of people don't know this, but we are in a golden age of aerospace development in the United States today. There are more rockets, more satellites being built today than ever before. And so I got to see that. I got a great perch at the FAA. All the approvals and licenses and all that activity has to flow through the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. And um, so that's what I did for 5 years. And then after that, I worked very briefly for a rocket company. So I transitioned out of the public sector into the private sector, and it was a Silicon Valley, California-based rocket company. I was commuting, from DC to San Francisco once a month. It was a very intense experience, very, very different from working in the public sector. And part of my job there for that rocket company, it's called Astra, was to find enough launch pads, to find enough ground support infrastructure, enough spaceports, right, to launch a rocket theoretically every day. They needed more launch pad. Every time you launch a rocket, you need a launch pad, and they couldn't find enough launch pads. And so part of my job was to go find enough or build enough or somehow acquire this real estate, is what it is, this infrastructure to go do rocket launches. And it was really hard. We failed. We couldn't do it. There are many, many constraints on building, as you can imagine, launch pads. It's pretty complex. These are extremely loud operations. Occasionally things blow up, they explode. I mean, it's extremely risky. It's extremely volatile. So you can imagine it's pretty hard. It's not like building a warehouse or a strip mall or a housing development. It's a lot more complex. And so I realized that the demand for launch pads exceeds the supply. And building new launch pads is very, very complicated. And me and the folks that I know have a unique skill set to build that infrastructure. Between my city planning experience, my experience as a regulator, and my experience in the private sector, I said, I sat down with my wife and I said, hey, I think I want to start a spaceport company to build spaceports, which is kind of a weird thing to say, right? It's like I want to go build a railroad or build a nuclear power plant. Startups don't really do that. And I spoke to some other mentors, and we were able to raise some money. So started the Spaceport Company in 2022. We're 3 years old, and we're headquartered here in Northern Virginia, but we have offices in Florida and Mississippi. Florida and Cape Canaveral, of course, and Mississippi for a reason we'll get into here shortly. But that's kind of the long kind of creation story of how we got from where I grew up and where we are today.
That's amazing. Tom, so a launch pad and a spaceport, is it basically the same thing?
A launch pad is a subset of a spaceport.
Okay.
So like you could think of an airport has a runway, right? A runway is just one part of the larger airport. An airport has radar and support buildings and fueling. So the spaceport is like an airport, and the launch pad is just like one component of the larger spaceport. But for the purposes of this conversation, they're essentially equal. Like I don't want to get too in the weeds, but yeah, there's different. Just like an airport has a lot going on, a spaceport has a lot going on too.
Okay. Yeah. So you noticed that, like you said, there was a demand for launch pads. There wasn't enough, right?
Yeah,
and that's why you decided to build it.
Yeah, that's correct. So I think a lot of people know the company SpaceX. They're the leading commercial launch services provider in the world now. They launch more satellites than anybody else in the world. There's a lot of international development, I'll note. So a lot of Chinese companies are launching satellites. European, Russian, Brazilian, Indian. So this is definitely a global thing. And it's being driven by the demand for data services from space. So every time you use GPS, you're using a satellite, right? Every time you look at Google Maps or Apple Maps, that map service is being provided by a satellite, okay? A lot of people don't know this. Every financial transaction uses the timing that's provided by the GPS system to make sure the money is moving in the right direction. So the entire financial services industry relies on satellites. Many farmers, the agricultural industry, the oil and gas industry, environmental monitoring, of course, weather forecasts. This all relies on satellites, and our dependence on satellites is only growing. And it's big business too. You see various estimates, but the space industry, the commercial space industry, the satellite industry, is it 300 billion? Is it 400 billion? I mean, it's big numbers. It's definitely hundreds of billions of dollars because you're providing all of those data services from space, mapping, weather forecasting, financial services, taking pictures of crops to make sure the crops are growing properly. Huge business. All of those satellites need a rocket, right? You can't get a satellite to space anywhere else. And every rocket needs a launch pad. And so currently in the United States, there are 4 facilities. If you start the Sevilla rocket factory, right, and you want to start launching rockets, you have 4 spaceports you can go to. There's Florida, California, Virginia. We have one here in Virginia down on Wallops Island, and we can talk about that, and Alaska. And that's it.
That's it.
We have 20,000 airports and airfields in the US, but we only have 4 places where a rocket company other than SpaceX can launch a rocket to space. SpaceX has their own facility, an exclusive use facility down in Texas. So that's the 5th one, but sorry, Otto, you can't use it. Only SpaceX can use it. So there's a choke point there. There's a bottleneck. We call it the spaceport bottleneck. And I experienced the pain of that when I worked at the rocket company. I said, oh, great. We have all these rockets and all these customers, all these satellites we got to take to space. And we're all trying to get through that same, it's like on a highway when you have to go through one toll booth, or you come to a bridge and there's a 6-lane highway going through a 2-lane bridge. It's becoming a problem. And so the issue here is a lot of these satellite companies might go overseas. They might start launching with a European company or an Indian company or a Chinese company, and that business might leave the United States. So we want to open up that choke point and build more capacity. And so we started out the company very early in the company's history. We said, oh, we're going to build spaceports on land, just like they've always been built, very conventional. We started scouring literally the entire globe for land because they have to be built in certain space. You can't build a launch pad or a spaceport inland. It has to be built on the coast. Why?
Okay.
Rockets are still pretty volatile. They still blow up a lot. And the US government wisely has said, until rockets become more reliable and they don't blow up as much, we want you to launch from the coast, because if there's, God forbid, an accident, we want that debris falling in the ocean. We don't want it falling on people's homes or on roads or schools or anything like that. So, okay, now you're being pushed to the coast, either the West Coast or the East Coast, or maybe up in Alaska or Hawaii, an island somewhere. And these have to be big facilities. They're industrial, big facilities. You have to have a lot of space to spread out because why? The rockets are loud. They're really, really, really loud. They're much louder than airplanes. And so try to find me like a couple of 100 acres on the coast, environmental rules, you're taking away people's fishing areas, you're taking away people's beach areas. Very, very, very expensive, number one. Just the cost of the real estate is expensive. And number two, there's a lot of opposition to it. Understandably so. You don't want to take away somebody's beach or turtle nesting sites or something like that. So we very quickly came to the conclusion that we are going to build launch pads on ships and operate the spaceport at sea. Boeing used to do this. They had a project for about 15 years called the Boeing Sea Launch Project. They had a converted oil rig in a ship, and they would put the rocket on the oil rig, and the oil rig would move, and they floated it out to sea, and they would launch, 1,000 miles out at sea. They launched 36 times successfully. It was a technical success. The problem was they were partnered with Russia. It was started in the late 90s. The world was a different place. And when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, the geopolitical consequences of that basically put them out of business. It made that project untenable. So that project failed, not for technical reasons, but for geopolitical reasons. But it showed the world you can launch successfully and repeatedly and cost effectively from the sea. Fast forward to today, the Chinese operate at least 4 ships launching satellites from orbit. And they're regularly, every month or so, launching satellites to orbit from ships at sea off of their coast in the South China Sea over in China. And so, there's no technical reason we can't do this. The challenge is primarily financial, raising the capital. This infrastructure is very expensive. Buying a ship, building a ship is not cheap. And then regulatory, right? It's making sure we're being good stewards of the airspace, being good stewards of the environment, making sure, the Chinese can do things. Or let me put it this way: we have a lot more rules on what we do because we're a little bit more sensitive about the environment and doing things in a different way, in a better way than maybe the Chinese are. So it's taken us a little longer to go, but the progress is progressing. We could talk about that, what we've been up to and our assets in hand here in a little bit.
So you just mentioned, Tom, how capital intensive is to build this out. So you had to go to the route as far as raising capital, right? Fundraising.
Yeah, so we've had one small investor who got us started. We had a seed investor, and they kind of got us started. But almost all of our capital to date has been raised through non-dilutive means, so through Department of Defense research and development contracts, or just organic revenue. We're essentially, our 2 sources of revenue are the U.S. government, U.S. Congress, the Department of Defense, and bootstrapping. That's where
Oh,
we're
that's
at.
great. Okay.
Yeah, so it's good. We've gotten up to this point where we have products where we could sell, we can generate revenue. That's awesome. But to go to the next step up, we are seeking partners. We are seeking investment, and we're always talking to investors because we've raised about $6 million to date. We've built a sea-based spaceport that can do small rocket launches. To do larger rocket launches like a SpaceX rocket, we're talking tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that needs to be raised. Very, very capital intensive. This is the aerospace industry. It's not for the faint of heart. And so finding the right partners, finding entities that can do that. There's not a lot of entities that can do that. And so we're a going concern. We're profitable. We have a good team. We're working our own bootstrapping. But we're always looking for partners who are able to consider that level of investment.
Sure.
Yeah.
As far as launches, have you launched already? Like, what area do you
Yeah.
do it? Okay.
Oh yeah. So we've done 5 launches to date. So we own a ship. It's based down in Mississippi. State of Mississippi has been very, very supportive of us. All of our launches to date have been in the Gulf of America. The Gulf, formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico, now the Gulf of America, and so yeah, they've all been kind of small, suborbital. So they don't take satellites all the way up into orbit. They are suborbital, but there's a pretty large market for suborbital rockets for scientific research. So we have a contract, for example, with the Air Force Research Lab to send payloads up into the upper atmosphere to do scientific research to better characterize the upper atmosphere, and then a lot of hypersonic weapons research is really what it is. So our adversaries overseas, unfortunately, are developing new weapons all the time. There's a bit of an arms race. These new weapons have much longer range and they're maneuverable. So the existing test ranges, number one, they're already busy, like they're already full, they're congested, they're doing their own thing, but they're also too small in some cases. The tests cannot be contained inside the fence line of these facilities because these new weapons have longer range and they're more maneuverable. So we have started testing it out at sea. The ocean is a very large place. There's a lot of space out there, and so that's why a lot of our interest to date has been from the defense world. We're very eager to supplement our defense-related income with purely commercial income as well, and civil space income. But that's been slower to come because we need to be able to serve much larger rockets. Our current ship can only launch small rockets, missiles, sounding rockets, things like that. So like I said earlier, we need to scale up our assets to be able to launch the big commercial rockets.
these launch pads, I guess, how often can you launch? I know you said you've had 5 launches already in the last few years.
Yeah, so theoretically we could go out like once a month,
Okay.
once another month. So we've only done 5 launches to date in the past 2 years. So we've had about one launch campaign per year. Our next launch campaign, we'll go out to sea at the end of April. We tentatively have one in July. So we're starting to kind of ramp up. That Air Force mission will be in 2026. And so, one of our challenges is we're a new company, and so getting the word out, doing events like this, letting people know that we exist, and working with our partners in the Department of Defense as well to find a way to. We don't want to compete with the existing ranges, right? We can never do what Cape Canaveral does, or White Sands Missile Range or something like that. Those are exquisite facilities, highly resourced, highly capable. We are more for the mission where, we've had DoD entities come to us and say sometimes the range fees are more expensive than the launch vehicle itself because the launch vehicle is becoming simpler and smaller and cheaper, and the range fees, as I said, the demand exceeds supply, and what happens then, right? Price goes up. They're able to charge, whatever they need to charge to cover the cost of operating there. So we're kind of finding this niche for certain DoD users that are doing research and development that need a lower cost, kind of lower fidelity, faster, quick turn sort of product.
For people who want to launch, Tom, I mean, if you're telling me there's only 4 launch pads in the US, I mean, like you said, I would assume there's a huge demand, right? Or
Yeah, so those 4 facilities, like I said, they're pretty big. They're large. You think of Cape Canaveral where the space shuttle used to launch. There's
Mhm.
multiple, as we said earlier, there's multiple launch pads at that spaceport. But yeah, I mean, we've had quotes from Space Force officials and Air Force officials saying every pad we have at Cape Canaveral is full. Like the inn is full. We're done. Now, they've done a great job of getting more efficient. I think it was 3 years ago, they said, we're going to do 100 launches in one year from Cape Canaveral. And they hit that mark. And now they're targeting, they said last year we wanted to do, I think, 200, and they're starting to they're finding ways to get more efficient with that one facility. And that's
Okay.
great, but the price is going up. If you're a rocket company, okay, like cool, it's good to know that maybe I can get on a launch pad at Cape Canaveral, but the price continues to go up and up and up and up. And eventually you're starting to reach diminishing returns. The nation needs to build new facilities. Like
Mhm.
we can't just keep shoving more launches into the same 4 facilities because it's going to kill the innovation in the commercial space. They're not going to be able to afford to operate there anymore.
Is there a significant cost difference, let's say, if they were to go with any of these 4 facilities compared to you?
Yeah, there absolutely is. Yeah, we
Okay.
we we don't like to compete on price. We compete more on capability, and so our primary advantage is that we can get you to the pad faster. It's less risky, right? Because we're way out in the ocean. There's just less stuff to hit. We're not closing beaches. There's no risk of hitting, a property on land or another piece of government property. At Cape Canaveral, there's launch pads right next to each other. And so if I'm on this pad, my rocket blows up, I might damage the neighboring pad. We don't have that risk. So what does that mean? We can lower insurance premiums. Your rocket company, if you operate with me, your insurance premiums are going to be a lot lower than if you're operating from Cape Canaveral. But all that being said, all those advantages, we are still cheaper on an operational basis, on a per operation basis than most other ranges. Um, I hope that's not the case. I hope I'm able to raise the prices, frankly. But for now, yeah, we are able to compete on both capability.
What's the typical lifespan of these launch pads?
Yeah, yeah. So the launch pads, the business case, I should say, is we factor in refurbishment of the launch pad after every launch. So you always assume it's going to blow up, right? We always assume that the rocket is going to destroy the launch pad. If it doesn't, that's great, but there's always going to be refurbishment. It's a pretty harsh environment.
Mm.
even when things go well, right? Even when things go well. So there's a cost, or there's a budget line for refurbishment after every launch, and then if the pad is destroyed, that's where the insurance kicks in, right? Every spaceport requires a rocket company to put up an insurance policy to cover replacement of the pad. That's never great. It takes a couple of years to replace one of these things, but there's already kind of a industry standard there where the customers, the launch companies know that they're going to have to pay for insurance. And then, there's just maintenance. If you don't launch at all, these things are either one way or the other. In our case, it's on a boat in the ocean. In the case of every land site, they're on a beach, like immediately adjacent to the ocean. Like you can literally see the waves. You can walk. It's on the beach.
Hmm.
And so that's a pretty harsh environment, right? There's a lot of rust. When I was working with with the rocket company I worked for, we had stainless steel fittings on a number of our equipment, stainless steel. And after a couple of weeks, they were rusting. It's a very, very, very harsh environment. And so you have to have constant maintenance. And so the capital costs are high, the operational costs are high, but you haven't yet asked me yet about revenue, right? The revenue levels are really, really, really high. The barriers to entry to building a rocket is really hard. So once you have an operational rocket, there is a lot of competition, but the level of revenue, I mean, the cheapest rocket you could go buy, if you were to start a satellite company, you want to launch a satellite, you're looking at least $10 million if you wanted to buy your
Wow.
own. You have a small satellite, some of these satellites are the size of a loaf of bread. They're very small. You can do what's called like a ride share. It's like UPS to space, it's like FedEx to space. You can have like a slot on a rocket. You don't have to buy the whole rocket. You just buy a little slot. You're looking at a minimum $300,000 for your loaf of bread size satellite, right? So, really you're looking at hundreds of thousands to tens of millions, to some cases hundreds of millions of dollars in cost, not price, cost
Hmm.
for that rocket launch, right? So we've been talking about all of my costs and the capital costs and the need to raise capital, but the level of revenue here is pretty fantastic. And once it's demonstrated, the barriers to entry, the moats around the business are pretty deep. It's pretty hard. It's not just like uh, um, starting an app or something like that. It's pretty technical.
Yeah, I'm sure. Tom, I have to ask because you said you were with the State Department abroad for almost 6 years, I believe, right? And then you came
Yeah,
here
yeah,
with the FAA. Were you
yeah.
doing, I guess, urban planning when you were abroad?
No, we never actually did. I was hired to do urban planning, but anybody who, in the DMV, I think a lot of people know the government. Sometimes the government hires you to do something and then they stick you in a different location. And so
Hmm.
that's what happened to me is I was hired to do a certain job for a certain skill set, but the Foreign Service is a funny organization, is that they're generalists, right? They don't hire just specialists.
Hmm.
And so my first job overseas was working in an embassy doing, basically, uh, it's called a management position, but it was like administrative support. So making sure the embassy had everything it needed to operate in terms of power and logistics and motor pool and security, sort of the administrative foundation of an embassy. And then my second job was with visas and passports. And so interviewing people to become an American citizen. And then my third job with the State Department was in their buildings department. That was actually the closest I got to doing city planning for the State Department was, um, managing the building, there's hundreds of buildings all around the world, consulates, embassies, and these are big, complicated facilities, air conditioning, security, so on and so forth, housing. And so that was really, really interesting. It's a group called the Overseas Buildings Operations, and they're right there in Northern Virginia in Arlington. So, but I never really did the reconstruction. Yeah.
How was that transition for you when you came back here, to Virginia and then transitioning to the FAA?
Yeah, yeah. Transition back to Virginia was fine. When we came back to Northern Virginia, we thought we would go back overseas. Yeah, I came back to Northern Virginia came to Northern Virginia for the first time with the State Department. and it was a tour here in DC. About 2/3 of my time was overseas, but the wife and kids and everybody were living here in Northern Virginia. And we thought, oh yeah, after this tour of duty, after this 2 years in DC, we'll go back overseas with the State Department. And then, like I said, the FAA kind of this opportunity with the FAA came up, and the transition out of the State Department over to the FAA was good. I mean, it was really I was pleased to be getting closer to my passion of aerospace, and the commute wasn't that bad, right? Going to the State Department, or going from where I was working with the State Department over to the FAA. The FAA is in L'Enfant Plaza. Big shout out to the VRE. Love the VRE. Love slugging. So it was a great transition. I mean, the State Department is, especially the Foreign Service, they are pretty elite. Like they're really, really serious, especially when you start getting to places like Iraq or Pakistan, kind of these hot spots. Um, and so uh, leaving them was tough. It was a really good job, but going over to the FAA, and like I said, seeing the growth of the space industry and learning the mechanics of how air traffic is handled, um, I can see now why air travel is really the safest way to travel. I know there's some dramatic changes or disasters every now and then, but like the people running the air traffic system are really top notch. And so that was really good. It's really good to work with good people in those organizations. And so are they a little bureaucratic? Yeah, in all instances. Is there room for improvement? There always is. And so we're always kind of, now that I'm in the private sector, we're always kind of prodding them to go a little faster. But it was a great transition. I mean, and the proof is in the pudding. I stayed there for 5 years, right? I really liked it, and got to do a lot of interesting projects there. So the transition from public service, from the FAA to the private sector, that
That was
was
the biggest one.
that was pretty intense. I mean, I was lucky I had worked in the private sector before graduate school, and commercial real estate, it's no joke. Like you got to really go work and hustle, as you know. And so I had to kind of remember that, like reactivate that skill set in my mind and in myself, and because Silicon Valley and high tech and that world over in California, it's intense. It is a boiler room. I mean, the pressure is intense. And so, a lot of government folks right now are going through a transition, in some cases involuntarily, unfortunately, and they're thinking about that transition over to the private sector. I encourage them. I thought it was great. I mean, I chose to do it, so it's a little different, but I would have done it again. I wish I had done it sooner, frankly. I was a little nervous leaving the public sector and going into the private sector, but it was great. Not only did I make more money, okay, that's nice, but there was just more opportunity to grow.
Hmm.
And you go into especially a startup, and they're like, this is your goal. Go figure it out. Don't ask for permission. Don't just go. Tell us what you need. Tell us what your tools you need. Go, 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 go. Whereas in the federal government, it's a lot more, it's a lot slower, right? There's a lot more need for multiple levels of approval. And so, anybody who's kind of ambitious and interested in going out and like making a change, and it doesn't have to be in aerospace, it can be in any sort of field. Um, you know, I I I really enjoyed, transitioning into the private sector. In fact, I enjoyed it so much, I decided to really cut the golden handcuffs and start my own business. And that was another kind of shock. Um, I don't know if I would recommend that. Like you do what you do, you give it up to God, say a prayer on it, let the Holy Spirit guide you, whatever. But yeah, the transition from public to private is something I would encourage people to consider at the very least.
Now, that was going to be my next question, actually, Tom. I was going to ask, how about the ultimate transition you just had a few years ago, leaving your stable W-2 to actually going off on
Right.
your own and doing your own thing, and it's
Yeah.
especially establishing a business that's so capital intensive. It's not like, hey, just a couple $100 or a couple thousand, and here we go, let's set
Yeah.
up shop. Not at
Yeah.
all.
Entrepreneurship is is very hard, right? Starting your own business, being okay, we'll talk about being your own boss, but like it's lonely, it's hard. You have to really nobody else is going to advocate for you. Nobody, you're flying without a net. So all of the lows are much lower, but the highs are much higher. Okay. You get to be your own boss, you get to make your own hours. The first couple of years we didn't have any payroll for the first 18 months. So it was just me.
Hmm.
Now we have payroll. Now there are people who have kids who like their mortgage depends on the like that's intense. It's very,
Yeah.
very intense. But launching a rocket from a boat is pretty cool, right? I'm not saying everybody should go start a rocket launching business, but like getting that first customer revenue, signing that first contract, seeing the money come into the account, you know, uh,
There's validation there.
so much validation. It is so much more rewarding than being a W-2 employee. And being a W-2 employee was very rewarding. And being a W-2 employee in the private sector was rewarding. That was more rewarding than being a public sector employee. You get to do cool stuff. I got to do cool stuff as a public sector employee, but private sector was better, and entrepreneurship is even better. And so it's really hard. I'm not gonna lie, there are good days and bad days, but the like I said, the highs are better, and the validation is definitely there. Do you run your own business? Is
I
that
do. I do. I went off on my own
you
last
agree?
year.
Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah,
It's a big risk. The good thing with me though is that I had an established clientele for in my previous firm for almost 13 years. So
yeah,
because of those relationship, it was a little easier for me just because what they're really following is the relationship with that other person. It's not what
right.
shingle or what name you have behind you, right?
That's
Um,
right. That's
so it
right.
was easier for me there, but there's still that huge risk just because you said, I have a wife, I have three children, I have a house. Yes, there's responsibilities.
Yeah. No, your emphasis on relationships is spot on. I mean, I never would have gone out and done what I did. I mean, we started the Spaceport Company because we recognized the problem, right? And I only
Hmm.
recognized the problem because of my time at the FAA. I wouldn't have otherwise have known it. In fact, we still meet people in the aerospace industry who are like, "What's the problem you saw?" Like, we have Cape Canaveral. It's this giant facility. Like in my industry, people still don't even realize it. They're coming around. They're starting. I think there's starting to be recognition of it. Um, but those relationships that I formed at the FAA, I still maintain those, and we would
Hmm.
not have been successful without those relationships. And
So
now
true.
the relationships, being able to say when I'm in a meeting with the Department of Defense, like, hey, I wasn't in the military. I'm not a military guy, but I did serve overseas in a combat environment as a diplomat. Taking those prior experiences and it builds credibility, it builds trust, it builds confidence. And so, again, for somebody kind of contemplating or being forced into a transition out of the public sector, you kind of have to think back and be like, all right, what skill sets do I have, obviously, but what relationships, more importantly, who knows me, who knows what I do, how can I leverage that to now not only survive in this new environment but thrive, right?
Hmm.
You've been thrust into this situation, whether you like it or not, or maybe you're choosing to leave, you're retiring, you know, go take those skills, make something of it. How do you thrive with those skills? I think is something, and the relationships are absolutely key. That's something my father always told me. It's what you knew, but it's also who you know, right? That's the old saying.
Yeah. Where would you say your passion from aerospace begun? I know you grew up in New York City. I don't know, maybe as a
Yeah.
child you saw something or experienced something or
Yeah, it's my brother's fault. I have two older brothers. When I was very young, he got me into science fiction. That's the short answer.
oh, okay.
Science fiction. It was books, it was Star Wars, Star Trek, and from a very young age, I was always very interested in space. I mean, it's. I wish I could tell you I had some sort of big experience, but it was my brother's fault. Yeah.
One of my most fascinating class in college, and I was surprised, was when I took astronomy. And for
Yeah.
the first time, I started learning more in college about space and the
Yeah.
stars and galaxies. And I was like, we're so tiny, we're nothing. And I was just
Yeah.
blown away. I was like, wow, this is
Yeah.
amazing. Um,
Yeah. So I think that's really important. So I think it's not only I think a study of astronomy can kind of be a little overwhelming, right? You can
Yeah,
almost feel like, oh my gosh, like, we're such a speck in
yeah,
the cosmos, and it's a little like almost scary, right? But I think another thing that a lot of people don't realize about space and the space very close to Earth, right? Between the distance between from the top of our atmosphere and out to the moon, which, as everybody knows, humans have been to the moon, right? It's not that far away. And the United States and other countries are trying to go back to the moon. So like just right in our little neighborhood, there's a lot of raw materials. There's a lot of resources. There are companies trying to collect solar energy in space where the sun never sets, there's no clouds. The intensity of the solar energy is higher in space and transmit it down to Earth to be received, to have baseload solar energy that's much more efficient than ground-based solar. This is kind of a science fiction thing, but there's companies starting to build this today. And that will turbocharge the demand for rocket launches and also for spaceports, right? So if we can start generating electrical energy in space and that's consumed on Earth, that's one thing because the energy is a lot more intense up there. There's also, asteroids and meteors and people hear asteroid and they get worried. They think, oh my gosh, like the dinosaurs are getting. They are full of raw materials, rare earth minerals, things that we need for industrial development down here on Earth. And so there's companies now experimenting on a small level. How do we mine those asteroids and get those materials, and maybe even someday have space stations in space doing industrial development. There are companies that are building pharmaceuticals in space in zero gravity. There are things you can do in zero gravity that you can't do on Earth. There are characteristics of space that we cannot replicate on Earth, at least not cheaply. The vacuum environment, the fact that there's no air, the zero gravity environment, the high radiation environment, all that energy. These are unique characteristics of the space environment that's relatively close. And so commercial and industrial activity is slowly moving up there to do things like pharmaceuticals development, computer chip fabrication, energy, so on and so forth. So we're starting to see this like continued slow growth in commercial and eventually industrial development in space. That's really exciting. I mean, there are some people who say, maybe someday there'll be like business parks in space, kind of like oil rigs out in the ocean. People will go out there for a couple of weeks, work to make pharmaceuticals, and then come home. I think we're going to see that pretty soon in this world, like in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years, where you're going to see fabrication facilities in space. So that's why we're trying to lay the groundwork for more spaceports and more launch pads to serve this like growing or emerging, I should say, opportunity.
yeah. Tom, coming to an end here soon.
Sure.
What do you know now that you wish you would have known at the start of your career?
At the start of my career, wow, that's a great question. I think, the best piece of advice I've gotten, or one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got, was when I was working at the rocket company, a guy named Martin Atik. I hope Martin doesn't mind me saying his name here. And I said to him, I was coming out of the public sector, right? And I was taught in the public sector to make your boss happy, right? So I said to him, he was my boss's boss. I said, hey, how can I make you happy? And he's like, what are you talking about? And he said, you can make me happy by making money, And I said, okay, that makes sense. And I said, well, Martin, how do I make money? And he said, take risks. Okay. Uh, and I said, well, just like look before you leap. No. He said, no, take calculated risks. In other words, the best piece of advice, what I could tell you to say is take calculated risks. We are too risk averse in our society. We are too willing to we're very comfortable, thank God. We have a lot of benefits. It's awesome. But sometimes it lulls us into a sense of complacency and we don't want anything to change. We're very risk averse. We'd rather say no. Have
Hmm.
you heard of the acronym NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? Or banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone, right? We need to get rid of that. We need to take risks again. And I'm not saying society, I can't control society, but I can control myself and you can control yourself. So I would encourage you to take calculated risks. Go for it. You know, examine the landscape, figure out the pros and cons, figure out the costs and the benefits, but then take action. Go for it.
That's great. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
What is your biggest challenge with your role today at the Spaceport Company?
Patience. I have to have patience. It's hard. The cash is always going down, the runway is always going down, the revenue
Hmm.
isn't coming in as quick as I like. Um, but it takes a long time for things to come, but they come, or at least they have come. Knock on wood. So far,
Yeah.
coming. We've got a lot of irons in the fire, and so I have to. I pray for patience. I pray to God. I say, just if it is your will, just let it happen. I'm here. I'm going to work hard every day. I'm going to put the prospects out there. But yeah, patience is the thing. We have a great team. We all work our butts off. I want to recognize the team. Everybody works really hard. We have a small team, 8 full-time employees, but we have a launch pad. We're getting revenue. We have contracts. Um, we want to get bigger. We always want to do more. We always want to get more money, but we have to just be patient and let things kind of progress in their own time.
Are
Sometimes you
all
can push too hard. Sometimes you can push too hard, and it's like feeding a squirrel in the park. You might scare the squirrel and they run away. You have to just be patient and let things kind of cook.
are all 8 of your team members remotely in different places or
We have let's see, we have now one, two, three, 4 people in Florida. So
okay,
there's a core down in Florida, and then we have 3 people in Mississippi, and then I'm up here all alone in Virginia. So I spend a lot of time
traveling?
flying to traveling. I have a lot of time. I'll see you in Terminal A at Reagan National. I'll say hello. I'll probably be there this week. So.
Oh gosh. Tom, what does the next couple of years look like for you in the Spaceport Company? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, yeah. So we're finally starting to get some traction. Like I said, we were profitable last year, so um, we want to have 20% revenue growth this year. That's our goal, at least 20% revenue growth this year. Um, we have a couple of products that we're rolling out, small products that we're rolling out, components and other smaller things. But the biggest thing I'm looking forward to is building our launch pad ship that's capable of taking satellites to orbit, as we've been discussing. So we don't yet have all the money yet to do that. We have a lot of irons in the fire. Like I said, we have a lot of prospects. We have a lot of champions pulling for us across the relationship network and the social network. So over the next year or two, I look forward to building it and then christening it and then operating it, actually doing a launch either down in the Gulf or out in the Atlantic or maybe even out in the Pacific. We have some customers out on the West Coast.
How much would you need for that raise?
Yeah, so that's a pretty high raise. We're looking at I don't want to say exactly how much because it'll
Okay.
be proprietary, but we're looking at north of $20 million. It's pretty hefty raise, and we're gonna bite it off in chunks. We have some incremental products to get us to that,
Hmm.
and so we have a roadmap that like I said, patience is important. I would love to have $50 million to go build the whole thing right now, and plus have a little bit extra, or a lot extra. Um, but we have found that bootstrapping, that actually going slow and being frugal and building revenue along the way, makes us more resilient, right? Um, and instead of uh, blowing everything at once, growing real fast, flash in the pan. Um, we are forced to think strategically and scrutinize every penny and make sure that every penny has a return on investment. And so, though that muscle memory will serve us very well as we grow towards that orbital launch capability.
Yeah. When you're not busy working, Tom, and running the company, what do you like to do for fun in your free time?
Yeah. So I've got kids. Like I love playing with the kids. We're very. I like to run. I like to read. I still read science fiction. A lot of traveling for sports, for kids' sports. I wouldn't say that that's fun, but yeah, a lot of spending time at home with the family, exercise, reading, things of that nature. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. If people want to learn more about you and what you're doing, the Spaceport Company, where can they go to, please?
Yeah, so we're on X. So the Spaceport Company, I think it's just at the Spaceport Co. And then on LinkedIn, if you just Google the Spaceport Company or search for the Spaceport Company on LinkedIn. So we're on LinkedIn and X. And then go to our website. It's just thespaceportcompany.com. Just like this, thespaceportcompany.com. So space and port company.com.
Great. Tom,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Can't wait to do it again.
Take care.
Bye bye.